Welcome to Perspectives with Asma Silva, recorded at WCCA TV channel 194. And on this show, we've done a lot of different programs. We've done local, local issues, national issues, and sometimes even international issues. Today, we're actually going back to being a little bit more local. We're here with Meg Gallo, who is part of the Refugee and Immigration Assistance Center in Worcester. And I want to thank Meg today for joining us. And first of all, if you'd like, today we're talking a little bit more on a local organization that you are with, trying to talk about what is the situation with refugees and immigrants in Worcester. So if you can tell us a little bit about that with the organization that you're working for.
Certainly, and Asma, thank you so very much for having me today. The Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center it focuses primarily on refugee resettlement. So we receive refugees who are being brought into the country through a partnership with the federal government and the United Nations. There are about 37 countries that participate in the UN's resettlement programs. And the United States has been participating with the UN since the Vietnam War. After the Vietnam War, we brought 1.3 million people here. And our government has been bringing 50 to 80,000 people a year through the refugee resettlement program into the country.
And how many of those come to Worcester?
Well, it has shifted recently. About 2 years ago, the Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center was one of 3 resettlement agencies in Worcester, and together we were bringing between 500 and 600 people into the Worcester community a year. That has been cut back. That's slowed currently. But we'll see.
So I'm going to ask a hard question.
Yeah.
A lot of people wonder when refugees come into their city or into their town, what are they offering, as a service back to the city or town? Some people have the impression that when you invite refugees or let refugees come and settle into your city, like Worcester, maybe they're becoming a drain on the economy of the city and the resources of the city. Could you enlighten us on what exactly they are doing, and how long does it take for them to maybe start giving back to their community that is hosting them?
Sure. Well, refugees give back to their community in a number of ways. One way we've seen, they come with very little. They have very little to begin with. So they're moving into sort of the least expensive neighborhoods to live in. And sometimes those are neighborhoods that have a history of crime. But refugees come, and refugees are not doing drugs. They're not, they're trying to be the best possible citizen they can be, because they don't want to do anything that might jeopardize their ability to stay here. So we have seen populations of refugees move into neighborhoods and completely turn them around. So that is one nice benefit of refugees coming into a community. Another is that refugees often fill the need for the entry-level job sector. So there are a number of factories and warehouses in and around the Worcester area that are always looking for entry-level employees. And quite often they have difficulty finding enough people to fill those jobs. American youth and college students don't want to work in factories and warehouses. And so refugees coming here and starting new are often very happy to begin with jobs like that. So they're filling an economic need in terms of the job sector.
Well, you mentioned entry-level jobs. So that leads me to this question. I know a few refugees myself, and some of them happen to be very well educated.
Yes.
And have a lot of experience from the country they're coming from. But unfortunately, as you said, when they come here as refugees with the refugee status, they're starting from ground zero.
Right.
And I've been told that it's very difficult for them to get back to the level they were at, or even try to achieve and start working in the field that they are experts in. Have you seen this firsthand as a challenge? And if so, what are we doing about it?
Right. It is a big challenge, and it runs the gamut in terms of people's background and abilities. I've worked with a middle-aged man who came here. He was a civil engineer back in his home country, and to go back through the testing and the schooling that's needed to work as an engineer here. At his age, he felt that was too challenging and too difficult. He came, his first job was bagging groceries at Wegmans. He's since moved on to working with different agencies as an interpreter. He's providing services to other newly arriving families, helping them to adjust. So he's found his way in terms of being able to work his way up and find better employment. I know some younger people who had received engineering degrees. Maybe they left their country and they went to Turkey or Egypt and they got a degree there, and then they were approved for resettlement and came here, and they were young enough that they started their schooling again. So I know one young man who's completed his bachelor's and now his master's in electrical engineering at UMass Lowell. So he's now looking for work in his field. I'm currently working with a middle-aged man who has a master's degree in teaching and special education, but he's going to start out with some factory work until his English gets stronger and he can perhaps look for work in his field.
So as you said, his English gets stronger.
Yes.
So what are the percent, I'm assuming most of these people coming don't know English. Or if they do, it's English as a second language and may not know it proficiently to get a job in their field. So what services does your organization, or at least direct them to help learn English?
Well, there are actually about 20 different organizations around, 20 to 30 different organizations around the Worcester area that offer English classes. So we will refer them to a program somewhere in the community that fits their schedule if they've already started working, whether they need an evening or weekend class. And most people are really good at developing and improving their English. It can be a challenge for older people. Naturally, it's harder for older people to learn a new language, but the younger people do very, very well, and of course, the children do the best. They get into school and they thrive.
So when you were mentioning people who are coming and then pursuing their higher education or their expertise that they were bringing from the country they're coming from, I noticed you mentioned a lot of men. What are with the women?
Women, interestingly, you know, they're filling a little bit more of the traditional roles, being home with the children. Some of them are pursuing school, but you know, it's if they have children, they're busy with their kids. That's usually the first priority for many of the newly arrived women coming, so it can be a little bit more of a challenge for them to be able to fit in childcare and school.
And that's why I was wondering, because I mean, the impression that I have gotten is I think a large number of the refugees are single women with children. Not correct?
Not real. Most are coming as families. Okay. We have, our agency has resettled very few single women with children. Most are coming with their husbands. Recently, we've been getting a few single men coming. But the women that are coming as single women with children, if they're looking for part-time work that they can do while their children are in school, you know, so it is more challenging, definitely.
So you said 37 different countries
Yes.
Currently that are coming into the United States
Yes.
as refugees. What are the top, like in the last 2-3 years?
Well, actually, there's 37 countries that receive refugees through the UN.
Okay.
So 37 countries that participate in the United Nations resettlement programs, the United States being one of them. If somebody is picked to come to the United States, it's a 2 to 5 year waiting period where they go through interviews, background checks, cross-examinations, retinal scans, fingerprints run through database after database. They have to be approved by every intelligence agency, and they're literally handpicked by Homeland Security to come into this country.
Oh, okay.
So the extreme vetting that some people call for really has been going on for many years. This level of you know, checking people's background before they're allowed to come has been going on in this country since 9/11.
Okay.
So refugee is actually a legal term, and you can only be given refugee status by the United Nations. You have to apply for that status, you have to meet certain criteria, you have to have crossed a border, fled your country, and it's not safe for you to go back, and safe for specific reasons that you have to meet. So if you qualify for refugee status and you're given it by the UN, UN, you can then apply to the UN for resettlement.
Okay.
If you get picked to come to the United States, it's that 2 to 5 year waiting period. And we then have in this country, we have 9 organizations that partner directly with the federal government. And so they include like Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services. Our agency is under the auspices of the Ethiopian Community Development Council.
Okay.
And so they have several affiliates all around the country. So refugees arrive and they're then assigned to one of those 9 volunteer agencies with the federal government, and then they're distributed among the different affiliates around the country. So refugees arrive here, they're brought here by our government, they arrive legally, they have immediate work eligibility. They're transported here by the International Organization of Migration, the IOM. After they've been here 6 months, they're required to pay back the cost of their plane ticket that brought them here.
Oh, wow.
So they arrive, they're immediately in debt,
Okay.
but paying
The American
that, paying that debt helps them also establish their first line of credit.
Okay.
So,
So when you're saying they're coming here and they have to pay back their plane ticket, they know that as soon as they come here, they need to hit the ground running.
they do.
And what is their living status when they arrive? What are
So,
they given
As
by
a
the government?
resettlement agency, we're required to have an apartment set up and ready for them. So we are given a small amount of money per person coming. So if there's a family coming, then there's enough for us to be able to put down a deposit and first and last month's rent on the least expensive apartment we can find for them. We are required to have X number of beds, sheets, towels, knives, forks, and spoons, all that sort of thing. We get all of that donated. So the apartment is ready for them when they arrive. And then they are enrolled in Social Security, so everybody gets a Social Security card. They get, for the first few months, they are eligible for food stamps. They get enrolled in with the healthcare center. They connected to a primary care doctor. We enroll the children in school, and then the adults are referred for English classes as needed and employment services. So that we call reception and placement. And the initial reception and placement services cover the first 90 days of their arrival.
Okay.
At our agency, we also offer another program called Matching Grant, which is sort of an alternative assistance program and employment program. If they don't need to stay home with small children, if they're not elderly or have health issues, if they're young and strong and ready to start working, we'll enroll them in our Matching Grant program, which gives them assistance with their rent, some cash assistance for the first 2 to 3 months, and then we work with them to help them find a job. And the goal is that within 3 to 6 months, they're working and self-sufficient, able to pay their subsistence level expenses, so their rent and food and basic needs. So that is a program that is really intended to help people get on their feet and running,
Right.
Fairly quickly.
What if you have a family that can't do it in the 90 days?
Then they're referred to another program that we offer called Preferred Communities, and Preferred Communities offers extended and intensive case management. So for individuals and families that may have special health issues or special needs that are making it more difficult for them to get settled in and get adjusted. Refugees are eligible to enroll in the Preferred Communities program within the first 5 years of their arrival here.
Okay.
And they can receive services usually up to 2 years in that program. So the reception and placement program, Matching Grant, is called Matching Grant because we're required to match the funding we receive with additional sources. So it can be volunteer time, donated items, or cash donations. And then Preferred Communities. Each of those programs are federally funded, but they're only funded based on the number of people that are enrolled. So when the number of refugees arriving it decreases, the funding decreases. The money comes with the people.
So you were saying that this is federally funded.
Yes.
So with the new policies that we're
Yes.
seeing, how is this affecting the refugee assistant organizations?
Right. Well, we have had one in Worcester close its doors. There are others across the country that are closing their doors. In 2016, the president and Congress get to decide each year how many refugees they allow into the country and from what countries they come from.
Okay.
So there are no Hispanic countries included in the refugee resettlement program, but we had in 2016. I believe the number had been 70,000. And the administration at that time increased it to 80,000 that year, particularly in consideration of what had been going on and continues to go on in Syria. So the idea was to bring more Syrians into the country and help with that relief. 2017, the threshold for refugees coming into the country had been set at 125,000 for the year of 2017. When the election happened, the administration changed. That number was cut to 50,000. From 125 to 50,000 were allowed in. And for 2018, it's been cut to 45,000. So when these programs are funded only by the number of people who come, if there's no people coming, there's no money. People can't afford to keep their offices functioning and pay their staff. So our agency is fairly bare bones and small as it is, so we have been managing to continue. We have been receiving small numbers of people coming every month, but we have been receiving arrivals each month, so we've been able to keep going. We also have an office in Boston and an office in Lynn. The bulk of the resettlement comes to Worcester, however, because Worcester has much more affordable rent than Boston and has access to good jobs for people. It's easier access to jobs here in this area.
So since your organization is called Refugee and Immigrant,
yes,
we've talked a lot about refugees.
Yes.
How does the immigrant population fit into this?
Well, our main focus is refugees and doing refugee resettlement, but we also will try to assist any immigrant who comes through the door with whatever their need might be. We've worked with people who come seeking asylum. So the difference between an asylee and a refugee is being brought here by our government after going through, rigorous trials.
Right.
An asylee is someone who manages to come into this country on their own, and they may arrive on a visa, and then once they're here, they submit an application requesting asylum. And again, they have to meet specific criteria, and it takes about 4 years for their request to be reviewed, and then it's reviewed by a judge who makes a decision to either approve it or not, and if it's not approved, they have to go back to where they came. But we have other immigrants who come to the office looking for help with their permanent residency applications or green card application, asking for help with their citizenship application, and also asking help with putting in applications to petition to bring family members here. Sometimes we have a father or husband that might arrive first and his wife and children are still in another country. Sometimes they're already coming through the resettlement program, but if they're not, there's other ways we can apply requests to have them join their family.
So you said the number was cut down.
Yes.
Considerably.
Yes.
From 125 to 50,000.
Yes, and now 45.
Now 45.
Yeah.
So what is the kind of countries that we're receiving refugees from?
So we're currently receiving people from the Congo, Eritrea, Central African Republic, so there's Sudan, Somali, there's a variety of African countries people are coming from, and we're still getting people from, they're Bhutanese people coming from Nepal, and this is an interesting population because about 27 years ago, the Bhutan was half Hindu and half Buddhist, and about 27 years ago the Hindu population was expelled from the country, and they crossed into Nepal. They were living they were living along the banks of a river really for a while, and the UN came in and they built 3 large camps, about 160,000 people in each camp, or it may have been more than 3, but they were hoping people would assimilate back into Nepal. Because I think that population may have migrated from Nepal about 300 years ago into Bhutan.
Oh, wow.
And, but Nepal is so poor, they couldn't really accommodate people. They stayed in the camps. So we have people that left Bhutan when they were very little with their parents and have grown up in these refugee camps and gotten married and maybe even had children of their own. And they are now being resettled all around the world through the UN. And we've had many people come that have grown up in Nepal, but were originally Bhutanese, that have settled in Worcester now.
So you've talked about so many different countries, like Somalia and Sudan, and now
we're also getting people from Afghanistan now too.
Right, and that requires a lot of different languages.
Yes.
And you said you were bare-boned in your organization. So how are you communicating with these people when they come?
Well, we have a staff person who is from France, and she works with many of our African refugees. Many people from the Congo speak French. We have a staff person who speaks Arabic, Swahili, and we have a volunteer who works with us who speaks Nepalese. So we usually can cover it, and sometimes we work with some of our own clients to come in and help interpret for others, and usually just through networks in the community and people that we know.
So we talked about refugees getting help in terms of where they live.
Yes.
Getting jobs to help sustain their living expenses. Even language services and help to learn the English language.
Right.
But what about like understanding cultural differences?
Yeah.
How do you handle that? Because these people are coming from refugee camps where if a mother or parent wants to go get something from across a camp, they may because out of need leave their child in the camp or the tent by themselves.
Right.
A 5, 6-year-old, 8-year-old. And go and come back like half a day later.
Yeah.
Whereas over here in America, we have rules and regulations. We don't leave our children home alone under a certain age.
Yeah.
So how do you like address these cultural issues and understandings that they may not have?
Right. So it's an ongoing process, and of course through the initial reception and placement there's a whole cultural orientation component that we present to them. And but hearing something just a few times is very different from really understanding as you settle in. So we connect them to many other organizations around the community that help support them and provide services and just help them learn the system. But and going to school and working, their kids go to school and they work with the school system and teachers, they start to learn and understand. But there really is a huge learning curve on so many levels, and it takes time. And sometimes we do have families coming back to us. Sometimes we do find that there has been misunderstandings with health centers or other service providers or the school, and they think that a family isn't taking care of their children properly, or they're concerned about something. There have been cases where DCF has stepped in and removed children from a home, and we've then come in and helped mitigate the situation, and it's often just come down to cultural misunderstanding,
right.
Or communication barriers. So there can be real challenges along those lines.
I'm assuming there's more also challenges of getting the cultural differences and understandings to children. It's one level to have maybe adults try to come to that understanding, but to kids. But that leads me to the question of, are the Wooster Schools equipped to handle these refugee children coming from so many diverse countries and cultures? Yeah,
the Worcester school system has actually been phenomenal. They have created a program called the New Citizen Center. So if they think a child can join in a regular classroom and do well, they will go in that classroom. If they're maybe high school age and they've had a gap in their education, sometimes they've left their country, they've been in a refugee camp and not been able to go to school, so their English isn't strong enough and they haven't had an education for many years, they can go to the New Citizen Center and work specifically on building their English language skills while learning about history and math and science. And so there are students that will go through that program for maybe 2 years, and then they go back to the high school as a freshman and start and go through high school. That's been very successful for many students. There is also a New Citizen Young Adult Center. So once they're 18, if they're really not able to mainstream back into high school, they can go on to the Young Adult program and continue receiving English-supported classes through age 22. Okay. And there's also a similar program for younger students as well.
So if people want to help I mean, this sounds like a great work of humanity, really.
Yes.
It's really bringing out a person's humanity with the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
How could a person help you in your organization?
We are always looking for volunteers to mentor and befriend refugees. We call it Befriend a Refugee. We have a Befriend a Refugee program where we will match up a family or an individual who would like to get to know individual or refugee family, and just really become friends and learn from each other. We don't put too many parameters around what this relationship needs to be like. They could get together once a week or once a month or whatever feels comfortable. So it's really helpful to a refugee family to build friendships in the community because they want to feel like they're part of this community. They don't want to, initially when refugees come, they tend to stay with other people from their own culture, and that's very helpful. They learn from each other, they can teach each other things, but they get to a point where, they say, we don't have enough opportunity to speak to people who speak English,
right.
and we just want to feel like we're part, we want to be able to participate in this community and be part of the community and not feel like we're outsiders. So building friends with other Americans is a wonderful way to help them do that. And American families can even just show people around the community, bring a family to the Ecotarium or to Tower Hill or Wachusett Mountain or a hike in the woods or a Green Hill Park and help them learn about the community, or just get together and have them over for, a picnic in the backyard and learn about each other. Sometimes refugees and families build very close relationships, and families are there sometimes. A refugee might be looking for someone to help them practice learning how to drive or get their learner's permit, or I got this letter from my employer and I don't understand what it means, and they can go to that American family that they now have that relationship with. They might come to us, but they could also go to a friend
right.
they now made and say, can you tell me what this means and what do I do? And so sometimes American families find themselves helping refugees navigate understanding the system here in America on different levels.
If someone wants to look up your organization, do you have a website, URL, and how to get in contact with you?
Yes, you can Google RIAC, R-I-A-C, for Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center, or you can Google Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center. Our website should come up, and phone numbers for all three of our offices will be there.
Thank you so much. We have less than 30 seconds, but I would like to thank you for joining us today. And what great work you're doing. I mean, it's very commendable that your organization is really helping. Humanity really is what you are really doing. So to end today's program, I know, like I said when we first started, we cover a lot of different issues, but today was a local issue. But a local issue that really is a national issue, because even though we're talking about Worcester and its particular refugee immigration and immigrants who are in this city, it really does apply to different cities all around the United States. And what we learned today is, as long as you have a big heart, and the great work that they're doing is really helping humanity. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you join us next time.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.